So, welcome to another of our Podcast Villa conversations where we're meeting podcasters from all over the world, finding out about not just what they do, but why they do it and the differences it's made to their lives and their enjoyment. So, joining me today, all the way from Berlin, I'm very pleased to introduce to you the hosts and producers and the genius behind Berlin Briefing, which is a daily English language podcast for anybody living in Berlin who doesn't speak the language, which, as Berlin's one of those international cities, is more and more people. We'll find out more about the show and how it's put together from the people behind it. So I'd like to welcome Albert and Abby. Good morning.
Hi. Morning.
Good morning.
Sorry. Guten Morgen. Guten Tag.
Guten Morgen. Yeah.
Wie geht's?
Alles gut.
Alles gut.
Okay. That's as far as I'm comfortable going with my German. So you two are you're a couple, you live together and you podcast together. I mean, maybe I'm diving in a little bit too much, but is there a bit too much of each other with that? In that it sounds like you spend a lot of time together. So I suppose, has that made your relationship stronger, or has that put strains on your relationship as well? Because I imagine there might be times, because Abby, you're the voice of the podcast, and Albert, you're the producer. There might be times when one of you tells the other one off for something.
You think that never happens.
So what is it like being a couple making a podcast?
I would say it added a new kind of dimension or layer to our relationship, because when we started, we were a couple. We are romantically involved, we are married, and that's it. And now we have kind of a business relationship in a way with the podcast. So the podcast is a different level. So we try to be very professional about it.
Not as emotional as we would be if we were bickering over something like,
where did you put the cornflakes? How did you load the dishwasher?
So yeah, I think a good example so normally, even now, it's an interesting time because Albert's home all the time doing home office every day. So, and I'm home if I'm not working at the retail shop where I'm part-time at the moment. So Albert will be in our home office where I do the recording, and I will read through stories and I will translate like German language news stories of the day. And then I do my best to translate them, from German into English. And then when we sit down in the evening to go over things, Albert, and I'm super sensitive to criticism. So Albert will say, well, that's not a good translation. Maybe you should use this word. And in the beginning, and still sometimes now, I would react more emotionally the way I would to my husband, who was left his coffee mug sitting out all day on the coffee table or something like this.
Never happened.
Yeah. But so I think to answer your question specifically, I think we have learned to work as business partners, not like so much emotional, like life partners. So we had to kind of add a new level to our relationship. Yeah. But it's 95% of the time it's really good. And then that little 5% we do get a little bit, but it's good.
For example, I keep on making the same mistakes. So the translation work in the podcast we do, not share, it's not 50-50, but I do it, sometimes Abby does it.
Like the translation part of the stories. He'll work on Sunday stories for the following day, on Mondays usually. So.
Yes. And I always make the mistake then that I use police is. For example, the police is, and Abby, now you should know. We've been doing this for 4 years. It's the police are. Why don't you? And
just
it's
little
stupid things like that.
But our relationship has definitely evolved to a different place in a positive way. I think in a positive way. And doing things like this, and there have been some instances where we've been interviewed for the International Podcast Day. We work together. And so there's no way we ever would have had to have that kind of a dynamic with each other if we weren't doing the podcast. So that's a takeaway from
Yeah.
So you're making effectively a news network. That is what you're creating. You're putting news out there every day, but neither of you are journalists.
No,
No.
that's
So
yeah.
what was the motivation for you to do this show?
I realized as an American living in Germany, 3 years in Munich, and then for the last 7 in Berlin, I was consuming only American news, Washington Post, New York Times, a subscription to the New Yorker. And I really was hyper aware to what was happening in America, but I was no longer living there. So in order to be more connected and to my city, I mean, specific like local Berlin news, not even just Germany as a whole. So it's really specifically Berlin. We decided that, like myself, the majority of our friends aren't from Germany, and German is their second language. And there was a need. There was a need to have daily, easily digestible, like, brevity is number one, and getting the news out there for those who don't are not comfortable reading or listening to the news in German. So I'm like the target audience, basically.
Yeah, and our friends were the target audience.
Yeah.
So we thought of our friends. I remember that we had a party at our place, and again, so the German quote at our parties is like 10 or 20%, so maybe 2 or 3 out of 15 people, and we were like, "Where do you get your news from? Do you know what's happening in Berlin right now?" And they were like, "No, not really." And that was one of the triggers, and I work for a software company that does software for radio stations and big radio organizations. And I was interested I was getting into podcasts at that same time as well. So a couple of puzzle pieces came together, and I was like, we're just 2 people, but maybe we can do this. Maybe we can create something, a process where we don't spend too much time on it, but we spend a good amount of time, and we can create something that has value. Can we do that? And can we do that on a regular basis? And that was basically the challenge.
And it was a challenge for him, because I at first was like, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a host, I don't do voice work. Like, how is this going to happen? And I think that's something that we have to make clear today. And a lot of our listeners still, after
4 years, almost 4 years.
We don't write the news. We're a really fancy translation service, pretty much. So sometimes people will criticize, think that we're writing these things. We're not. We're just taking, and we cite everything that we translate in the original German. So it took some convincing on Albert's part to like, well, maybe you should try this.
Yeah.
And my voice has evolved over time.
Yes.
I've worked on it. So
is that has it really? I mean, maybe that's a question for Albert. Has your voice really evolved, or have you just got more comfortable with it? Because this is a big thing that faces a lot of people when they first hear it. People are freaked out and go, "Who's that? I don't sound like that. That's really weird. I don't sound as exciting as I thought I did."
Well, I think
So I'm producing. I listened to every episode that we ever made, and Abby in the beginning, I think because she was new to the medium and she was not used to speaking into microphones, she was like nervous. Nobody was there, but she was like nervous, and she spoke. Now, when I listened to all the episodes, the first ones, it's like listening to 1.5 or almost 2 times speed, because she's going through it really fast. She wants to get it over with in a way, like getting through the script. And now she's like really comfortable. And some people listen to the podcast to learn actually English. I had that feedback as well, because she takes her time. She's slow. She makes sure that she's really well understandable, and that's also a value in itself. So some people almost think she got so consistent, and some people think she is not even a real human.
Like, they wanted to know, is this a generated voice, or is this no, not a robot? No.
No, you definitely got comfortable, much more comfortable, and
I think with me, I didn't study any kind of like voice training, but I know I always have my everything. I listen to myself. I've had, like blast my own voice in my ear so I can really hear my pronunciation. And I don't know. I just, there's a cadence that I use that it's gotten to be second nature to me. It's something that I had to work on, and that's not how I speak, good morning. This is Ab. And so I don't talk like this when I'm like going to the grocery shop or something like this. And I think I'm really proud of this, actually. I can say this, right?
Yes.
That, if I have to, I'm like, Albert will be going over everything and producing. He's like, this just doesn't sound right, or I stumble over a word. I will just do a sentence, and Albert's able to edit it in, and you really can't tell a difference. So I'm able to kind of like channel my voice into a certain way pretty consistently.
Yeah.
So.
And was there a moment for you when that you suddenly felt the change, or was it a gradual thing over time?
It was a gradual thing. It was a gradual thing. But I had trouble listening to myself in the beginning. I was like, oh, goodness. Now I listen every morning and I don't think, oh, that's me. It's just, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that, and I think also one important thing is at some point we upgraded our equipment. We had like a cheaper headset, which would create like a humming noise, and we had to earth basically the recording to reduce that, and she had to put her finger on some piece of metal to.
Oh, I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, and I think that added to this.
I had an antenna out of alu foil here.
No, but I think that added to the stress, and so once this thing was away, again, you could focus more on the actual story. So like equipment and being in a comfortable environment, I think is also really important. And I noticed that once this stressor was gone, you forgot about it. Yeah, you got more comfortable. Yeah.
See?
But wow. I mean, that was less than a year in. So
yeah. And then
yeah, well, I that's just a wonderful mental image that's created in my mind of you kind of doing it, and then somewhere at the back of your mind having the fear that you might be electrocuted at any moment.
And we also have cat. We have 2 cats, and the cats sometimes, on occasion, they'll be outside of the door, and you'll hear this like this like meow. So sometimes we have cats involved, and we'll have the birds outside. But
it's okay. Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. So you've obviously come on quite a lot, but in many ways, the show is effectively what it was at the beginning. In terms of where you are now in the audience, you started off and you were like, "Hey, we've got a lot of English-speaking friends that don't understand what's going on. The German isn't very good." I'm assuming they listen now, but in terms of like how the audience has grown, what kind of has your audience gone to different people that you didn't expect would listen to it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know that it's gone to an audience that we didn't. Well, you said people who are trying to learn English, but just the number of people who are listening to us is shocking to me. Sometimes, I mean, still, like last month. I mean, for us. Yeah. I mean,
so in March we had, like, for the first time we had 50,000 downloads accumulated, wow. Which is still mind-blowing to us. So we started like every podcast, we had like 10, 20 downloads a day. And now we have about 2,200, 2,300 downloads per day.
And one other thing we did was the Patreon's been a year.
Yeah, the Patreon has been a year. Yeah.
And Albert, and that was another thing that Albert had to convince me on. Like, he's like, "Oh, maybe we should just try and see if anybody wants to contribute." I was like, oh, "Really?" And it's unbelievable. Even during Corona, people are willing to contribute. The generosity is really overwhelming, really. And just through that.
Yeah, and the feedback is more. That's also an interesting thing, because since we have the Patreon and since we have like several ways that people can donate to us, they leave us a message, and and often it's like they of course when they donate they appreciate what we do, but they write that, and that's even as important as the money is nice, but also having this kind of assurance that what we're doing is making a difference, is helping, that's really the amazing thing about the podcast. That what makes me the most proud about it.
And I've learned a lot of things. We have our listeners. I will say we have a thoughtful group of listeners in Berlin. And while we don't write the news, the way we translate the news and the language that I use when I'm doing a translation has been criticized on occasion. Should I give a specific example?
Sure.
When I was translating about what was going to be reopening and who was going to be affected by reopenings of things after like the long, hard lockdown we had, it was mentioned that sex workers were not going to be able to work. And in Berlin, this is it's legal. But the translation that I did, I used the word prostitute. And I didn't personally, and I'm a bit ashamed of this after having done the research, after one of our listeners made me aware that term is really frowned upon. It should be sex worker. And it was a very thoughtful criticism. It's happened on a couple of different occasions, how we are translating the news and the language that we're using. So I've learned quite a few things about how, the language that I use.
How do you cope with that? Because I imagine, because the podcast is such a big part of your life, and it's made such a difference to your daily life in terms of what you're doing, and you've obviously got a lot from it. When something like that comes in, I imagine it can feel very, like, it cuts right to the heart of you, and you feel very.
I mean, it's like you can tell. So if people have a desire to be heard and they search the dialogue, it's usually a very good dialogue, and then it's easy to accept the criticism because they have something meaningful to say, and we learn something out of it. If somebody is just annoyed that we are doing the wrong topics, but is just putting a bad review on a platform, or is not answering, because we take point. So when we get criticism, we answer, and we try to get into a dialogue. I mean, if somebody's not interested in a dialogue, then it's not worth it. So that's easy to ignore. So
I mean, we do. We personally respond to anyone who comments positively or negatively on social media. But I will say the positives far outweigh the negatives. But at any rate, and then when I've asked people specifically if they had an issue with something I said or a story that we don't editorialize, we just report the news. But I guess just merely by the stories we select, it shows where our minds are. While we steer clear of like culture, nightlife, that sort of thing. Even there's no nightlife anymore right at the moment, but we only talk about politics, health, like socioeconomic things. So we steer clear of like the fun stuff in Berlin, if that makes any sense. Entertainment and culture. So when somebody does comment like, oh, well, why are you only talking about coronavirus or something like this? I will write, or Albert will write and say, please message us, if it's not done on a private messaging, if it's just on like Twitter or on Facebook, please reach out personally and let's discuss this. And if they fail to respond and they just want to just shout into the void about something they don't like, then, oh, well, we could have discussed it, but then that kind of stuff I can just be like.
Yeah. And every discussion we had so far was positive, that
super constructive.
So when we went into a dialogue and we had criticism, it was rightful criticism, and in the end we found like an agreement or a way forward. So and that's what humanity should be about, right?
And honestly, the people who did criticize were so happy that we were in touch with them, and they are continuing to listen, and so just taking that time to reach out to your listeners, so we aren't just like robots just like spewing news that and without emotions, because we have them.
So those are what we might call public mistakes. What I want to ask you about now is mistakes that you've made that maybe people listening wouldn't know about. So maybe there was a time where you recorded a very detailed thing and you forgot to save it, or the computer crashed and you lost the recording, or maybe like the piece of equipment that you had where you could get electrocuted every day. Was there certain mistakes along the way that make you laugh now when you think about them, or you feel embarrassed about, that you wouldn't mind sharing?
Oh, I do edit a lot of explicit.
And I'll get in trouble because just last week he's like, can you come here for a second? He's like, listen to this. And I thought he was going to, until he's editing my voice, and I put on the headphones. He's like, well, just listen. And I thought he was going to have spliced together, for instance, one of my takes with another take. Can you hear the transition or anything like that? So all of a sudden, and then it's just like a ginormous F-bomb. And then you can see like, he's like, do you hear what this sounds like in my head when I'm listening back to what you're doing? And he's actually said we should do like a best of me just like, I mean, it's pretty bad. We would offend a lot of people had we. So, that's what our listeners don't know, how frustrating it can be. There are times, that one time, I don't even know what, I will get a case of the giggles with like a pronunciation of a word. It will be just like a really, we'll try it on a Friday. We'll try to end on an upbeat note, like the last story on a Friday, because we do Monday through Friday. It will be positive. And I think it was a story about some recall of some kind of canned good at a local grocery store chain that was like, return it, don't eat it, you could get ill from it, blah, blah, blah. And I forget the name, and it was just such a ridiculous name. And I don't know how many takes I had to do. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I remember it, but it was
that's
like,
kind of thing. Like I will just get a case of the giggles and I won't be able to get through a story.
Yeah.
So, and then when the finished product comes out, like nobody has any idea that it happened.
I mean, what else happened is like that we took an episode the day before and uploaded that instead of the actual episode, and then people would write to us like, this sounds the same as yesterday, or that we made an editing mistake, or a word was not clear, and then we have to go back, like, and that's the thing we usually do. We work the evening before and do the recording, and then in the morning we publish, and when it's published we listen to it again. So we do a quality check, but we do the final quality check when it's on air.
Yeah.
And
it's
then
it's 6 a.m.
Yeah, it's 6 a.m. or 5:30 in the morning, and you do the quality check, and like, oh no,
I'll hear something. I was like, that's not the right word.
And I'm like, I just want to keep on sleeping, and then, no, we have to fix it. And then
Yeah.
So where's the threshold? At which point do you go, it's fine, we'll just snooze a little longer? Or at which point do you go, we have to get up and record again?
I'm a little bit more like, Albert, please just go re-edit. We'll just record something, like a sentence really fast, and then and I'll drag him out. I mean, we usually do. I'm a bit of a perfectionist that way, I have to say.
Yeah. The thing is, like, the margin of error, and that's part of the process, which we are proud of. The podcast is fully scripted, so there is a very small margin of error in that. Of course, I could forget something, or have a section that Abby spoke twice and repeat that. I don't think so far this has happened really.
German names I'll get wrong.
Yeah, German names or something like that. So when we have a German name that we get wrong, and we know that it's wrong, we're like, okay,
if it's like, for instance, like a politician's name, and the pronunciation of EI and IE in English and German is completely opposite. And if I'm reading in English but it's a German name, I'll say Larscheid instead of Larscheid, and Albert was like, so we'll have to go back. But sometimes we're like, the listeners won't hear it. They won't notice.
So maybe spellings and pronunciations, we let it slip. But if we have a factual error in it, we have to. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. And I guess really my final question for you is, can you imagine life without the podcast now? Because, as you say, you're coming up to 4 years. It's become part of your daily life. It's your routine, like Monday to Friday, you're waking up listening to it, you're going to bed, it's there. Some people might say, well, actually, if you stopped doing it, you would get all this time back and you'd be able to do other things.
I get something from it every day. If I wasn't doing the podcast, I'd be listening to this podcast if someone else was doing it. So again, the advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. And I'm like hyper aware of what's going on in the news, but I would miss it. I mean, it's a part of our routine now, really. Like, and I would miss doing it.
Yeah, we don't think a lot about it, but of course we are happy on Friday or Thursday evening. Yes. Like, okay, now we don't have to record for 2 days. Awesome. Or if we have like holidays like Easter, like when we are recording right now, it's nice to not have to think about the podcast. But after a couple of days, it's like the urge. Like even when we're on vacation, we're like, okay, let's do like 2 this week at least. You know,
Yeah, we've actually recorded in Manchester.
Yeah.
We were at the International Festival like 4 years ago, and we had like this little mini, and we did it in our hotel.
Yeah.
So and we've done it from
We've done
Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Ostsee, Baltic Sea.
Yeah. Did we do it in Egypt? I don't think we did it in Egypt, but we did it in several different locations. And before Corona, I was traveling a lot, so we did it distributed. So Abby records, and I edit it wherever I am, so that's easy. But we have been recording in. Abby was in the US for a while.
Yeah.
For a longer time, and she recorded it in the US and on an iPhone with a microphone. And we let our listeners know, like, so might sound a little bit different the next couple of days, but we still did the stories and we still produced.
I think what our listeners really like is that there's some continuity to it. It's every morning, available from 6 a.m. It's always unless it's like a longer winded bit about Corona regulations, it might be a bit longer, but normally it's between 8 and 10 minutes long, 4 stories. And people have become like, they rely upon it. It's the morning. And we hear this from our listeners all the time. Berlin briefing is my morning routine. Or every day when I'm driving my kid to the kita to drop a daycare, we listen. And we had somebody gave a donation on Patreon, was like, we thank our list. If they say, yes, you can use my first name and thank on Fridays. Oh, you have to mention my son. Use my son's name because we listen every morning together. So that, even though on Fridays, I'm like, okay, 2 days, but we realize, especially through Corona, there are people who really are relying on us. And we only know this because we had really great feedback from them. So that's the reason.
So long story short, I think we cannot live without it at the moment. Like for the foreseeable future, I think we are in this for the long haul. Yes.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, and I'm really thankful for you taking some time to chat to me about it today. I think whenever I've done some of these, I've always found that I'm learning something from it, and I don't have a lot of experience with something like Patreon, but I never really realized what it was doing until you talked about it then, and that side of things is definitely, it's like it's creating a deeper connection with what you're doing and with your audience. I mean, so much of podcast is about community, but I think in terms of the feedback and the reviews that you're getting from there, it's so valuable.
Really, definitely.
Yeah, it's great. It's it's so satisfying, you know. Like we knew deep inside, we knew when we started this is something that, you know, people will appreciate, and we didn't want to make this a commercial thing. We had no monetary intentions in the beginning, but last year I thought, you know, it would be nice if and I think our listeners would be happy also to support us and to cover our costs, and maybe we can go on a vacation from it, and we were positively overwhelmed. We didn't expect, so we would have been happy like just to cover our costs, but we can more than cover our costs now. So, and that's really nice, and that's and the feedback that we get is also incredible. So that makes it worthwhile. Yeah.
But one thing, our podcast is always free. We don't have any the only incentive we have with our Patreon is at a €15 threshold, we send our listeners, we have tote bags that we send.
Okay. Oh, there we go. Here's the other bit. Look at that. There we go. And what's it like have you ever seen one of those when you've just been going around town?
No, because Corona, really, because we don't go anywhere.
Yeah.
We don't go anywhere, but people will send us photo. We'll say, oh, you know, have you been out shopping with your tote? Post a photo on Twitter or something like that.
We had one of our listeners saying, "Oh, I saw someone the other day with your bag, and I want to have one too." Like that we had once.
So the day I finally were out and about traversing more than just like the 2 blocks around our flat, maybe when I do see one for the first time, I'll be really happy.
Yeah. One of the things I'm looking forward to happening is the experience that happened to me once, where you're on a train and the person next to you is going through listening to podcasts and they start listening to yours. That was an incredible experience. Yeah.
You're
I've Damn it, I
You
did
feel
it.
like a celebrity, don't you? Like I made it.
Oh yeah. And then you don't know what to say. Should I say something? Should I not say something? Is it going to be
that's
very
like-
weird?
Mhm.
Well, I'm really thankful for your time and also for the
Oh, thank you,
preview
Ant.
of that extra Patreon level, which is going to be the Abby F-bomb episode.
Best of.
No.
Not safe for work.
So
No, we
just-
do all our content. We don't. So
Yeah.
we do the. You could do a Patreon, like have extra content for the patrons, but
We don't do this.
we don't do this. So everybody gets the same content, because we don't know in what situation the people listen to us are in. Many of them are hurt by Corona and
Mhm.
cannot afford.
But yeah, it's all Berlin Briefing will always be free for
Yeah.
everyone who wants to listen. So that's
So
the most.
before we go, just
Mm.
the very simple things for social media and for the podcast itself. Where can people find you and listen?
Mm.
So we have the website is berlinbriefing.de. Very simple, or you just Google it. And on Twitter we are at Berlin Briefing, one handle, and on Facebook we are also, you can find us as Berlin Briefing, and there are our main ways of communication.
But anywhere you find podcasts.
Yeah,
you'll
and
find
email is berlinbriefing@gmail.com. So these are the mains of how you can reach us, basically.
Brilliant. Dankeschön. Tschüss.
Bitteschön. Tschüss.
Tschüss.